Well, the coronavirus continues to spread in South America. Colombia is one of a number of countries that have imposed restrictions to try to reduce rates of infection. But as DW's Nicole Fröhlich reports, some people and businesses are failing to stick to the new rules with potentially lethal consequences.
It looks like a scene from a different era. A bustling market in the heart of Bogotá. The capital, like the rest of Colombia, is under strict quarantine. But here, it almost seems like business as usual. Keeping the market running throughout the lockdown is a big job, says manager Fredy Rojas.
We've installed 40 sinks and 55 gel dispensers. These are strategically located throughout the market. We're also enforcing a minimum distance of 1 meter between people in order to avoid gatherings. Every day we sanitize the entire perimeter of the market. We also disinfect the parking lot and all the vehicles.
Each of the 1,500 people who enter Bogotá's biggest grocery retailer every day have their temperature taken and must wear a face mask at all times.
All of these measures may seem like more than enough, but even during the pandemic, old habits die hard, something that could render all the hand washing and sanitizing useless.
In reality, not many people seem to care about the social distancing guidelines. They wear their masks incorrectly or take them off to chat or have a snack. And while Colombians are told to leave their homes only when absolutely necessary, some shopkeepers are actually seeing more people now than before the restrictions came in.
The flow of people has definitely increased. Everybody stuck at home tries to come by. I'm seeing 1, 2, and sometimes even 3 people from the same household. I ask my customers whether they'd like me to deliver their groceries to them at home. Most of them tell me no. This is the only way I can get out for a while.
Camilo Casallas has worked at the market for nearly 50 years. He has never known anything like this. With his fruit stall suddenly turned into a high-risk work environment, Camilo can't help but feel a little fatalistic.
I do feel very exposed, but here's how I see it. If I catch it, it's meant to happen. I've lived my life.
Every day, he's putting his physical well-being on the line to keep his business alive. With takings halved since Colombia went into lockdown, Camilo says he can only keep going for another month. The survival of his fruit shop depends on how the government manages the crisis. Camilo's health depends on whether his fellow shopkeepers and customers can stick to the rules and adapt to the new normal.
For more on this story, let's speak to Merike Blofield. She works at the German Institute of Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, and she's an expert on Latin America affairs there. Merike, thank you for joining us. I want to ask you about the images we saw there, some hygiene measures being followed in Colombia, but also markets full, people not really respecting social distancing rules. If the virus spreads there, how big of a threat is this to the Colombian health system?
Well, first, just to put this into perspective, Colombia has instituted strong measures to reduce interaction. And if we actually look at Google mobility data reports, it shows that social distancing measures in Colombia, as well as Latin America overall, have and in general actually been very effective. And if we look at this data compared to the pre-pandemic baseline, Colombians have actually reduced their movements much more than Germans, for instance.
Okay,
this said, of course, yes?
So Colombia is an example, of course, of where you're saying some of these strict lockdown measures have been effective. I want to ask you about the other side of the picture, because Brazil is a country that's been most affected by the pandemic in Latin America. There are almost 2,500 people that have died there so far. But at the same time, President Jair Bolsonaro has been protesting coronavirus lockdown measures. He called the global measures hysteria. Why is that?
So he has, I think, to an extent, a rational economic strategy or political strategy to place blame for the fallout for the inevitable high costs of the pandemic elsewhere. And the economy is taking a huge hit, and his strategy is to keep demanding that the economy stay open because Brazil cannot stop. Meanwhile, subnational entities have moved to fill the leadership vacuum and are implementing social distancing measures. And these measures are actually slowing the spread of the virus and the deaths, so they are to an extent effective, while Bolsonaro continues to blast these political actors. And so the best case scenario for Bolsonaro is if the healthcare system is not overwhelmed due to these measures, and he can say, look, this was not such a big deal, and he can then shift blame for the economic fallout, which is inevitable, to everybody else. It's a very risky strategy politically, as a majority of Brazilians do support social distancing, and infections have likely not yet peaked, but it's certainly playing to his base.
Merike, let's take a look at the whole
picture. Meanwhile, of course, he thrives on controversy.
I want to ask you about the whole picture because we've seen varying degrees of restriction. On the one hand, there are countries like Chile, Peru that have strict measures in place. If you look at Central America, Nicaragua is still, for example, allowing big events to take place. Why hasn't there been more coordination between Latin American countries?
Well, I think, governments are reacting very differently to this same threat. And unlike on perhaps many policy issues, this is not explained by ideology or the left-right dimension. You mentioned Chile and Peru, that have conservative governments, but Argentina, for example, with a left government, was actually the first to implement a lockdown. And it's not even explained by historically how stable or institutionalized these governments are. El Salvador has been quick to respond, and Brazil, and to a lesser extent Mexico, much less so. I think the divide is one of leaders who are willing to learn from evidence and to use that evidence to protect their citizens, and in doing so to make some hard decisions, and those who are not. And the former had a chance to look at China and then watch the European experience and learn accordingly and move swiftly to implement lockdown measures. And the latter have engaged in typical behavior from a populist playbook. They came to power distorting facts, blaming their opponents for everything, and scapegoating.
All right, Merike, we have to leave it there. Merike Blofield in Hamburg, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, let me just finally say that you can move swiftly to implement lockdown, but unless you do emergency social assistance at the same time, these lockdowns are not sustainable. And that's another thing. The informal sector market in Colombia, you can see that. I mean, unless people can feed themselves, they still have to go outside. And so the governments that are most effective in reducing, implementing social distancing are governments that move swiftly to lockdown and then provide emergency social assistance.
Okay, thank you so much, Merike.
Okay.